I'll go ahead and jump on in. Thank you for that intro, Tony, as well as Joni there. And so once again, my name is Marshall Baranek. I wanted to thank you all for joining us here today and taking some time out of your day to learn a little bit more about the MyAssistant product for your 300 construction and real estate system. Please do submit questions as those come up. The best way to do that is through the chat area. And Tony is really good at interrupting me and plugging those questions in the appropriate time. So please do submit that to be interactive today. But we will reserve some time at the very end for some question and answer. And that actually segues well into today's agenda. We are going to start off today's discussion by talking about what is MyAssistant. Why are we all gathered here today? And then we're going to take a look at this tool in action. We're going to start by going over some overview slides to provide a little bit of context, but the couple examples we're going to look at today are, better ways to manage vendor liability compliance. We're going to talk about payroll employee direct deposit and automating the distribution of these reports, as well as other ones that may, be around your construction projects. We're then going to open it up for questions. So please do submit those questions as soon as they come up. But as I mentioned, we will have some time available at the end. Also be aware that we have an Office Connector session coming up later this week. So if you have not already registered for that, be on the lookout for those registration links. And at minimum, if you'd like to attend the Office Connector session for your 300 construction and real estate, put that request into the question section as well, and we'll follow up with the appropriate registration link for you guys. And so when we talk about the different products here with Sage MyAssistant, I want you guys just to be aware that there are several other products within this construction and real estate family. As you can see, MyAssistant and Office Connector on the bottom right-hand corner, as well as some other cloud tools that are available for your system. So if you have any interest in any of the products you see here, perhaps the new buyout solution or Sage Service Operations, we'd be happy to facilitate with more details. But today we are going to be focused on the Sage MyAssistant and what that can offer for you and your company. And so as I mentioned before, I like to start off with the question, what is Sage MyAssistant? Well, MyAssistant is a task-based solution that's going to distribute information from your 300 CRE database to the right people at the right time. We're going to automate the distribution of reports to provide more business visibility into the key stakeholders, giving them the information they need. The thing that I love about MyAssistant is that it never takes a vacation and MyAssistant never misses a task. So you can rely on MyAssistant to start delivering information and automating some of these processes for your business. We're going to look at some different examples today, but your accounts payable department will be notified if a vendor compliance ever expires. MyAssistant will notify project managers when your jobs are over budget. And I'll be showing today how we can also send direct deposit stubs to your employees when they get paid. And so what this will lead to is the readily availability of information, which will lead to accountability across the different departments within your company. Today, we're going to take a look at the different tasks that MyAssistant can offer to provide those efficiencies for your company. Now, I mentioned that MyAssistant is a task-based solution. So how does it work? Well, we're going to break down these tasks into three main components: a condition, a schedule, and an action. So the first thing you're going to think about is what needs to be monitored. Well, I have a couple examples that I'll be going through within the slides, and then we'll show it in the software as well. But one thing that you may monitor is your vendor liability insurance. And so you're already doing the condition, schedule, and action in one regard or another. Perhaps you have vendor compliance set up within Sage, and you go in and check reports on a regular basis. Well, we can set parameters. So what do we want it to return? Well, in this situation, we want to return those vendors where their liability expiration date is equal to the current date plus 30 days. That's a fancy way of saying I want to return those vendors who are coming up for expiration soon. You may want to run this schedule once a month or perhaps once a week, or you can run these on demand. And we're going to talk about some other ways that we can get fancy with the schedule. So like after something happens within Sage, we can trigger the action. When you think of the action, I want you to primarily think of an email. And so what happens when this condition is met? Well, you have a few different options. You could email the vendor and request them to send you updated insurance information. With MyAssistant, we're going to get the list of vendors on the schedule that you determine, and we're going to email them the appropriate information. Alternatively, you may want to email someone internally and task them with following up on those different actions. Another example may be payroll checks. I'm sure you guys run payroll checks, once every 2 weeks or perhaps once a month. And what we want to do is look through those payroll checks and return a list of that. Well, that's going to be important because you may be distributing direct deposit notifications, via paper, or perhaps you are printing to PDF, putting that in an email, and emailing out, direct deposit records, or you're managing that one way or another. But with Sage My Assistant, every 2 weeks, or at the first of the month, we can email out a direct deposit notification, and we can actually password protect it as well. And we can set this to run each time we run payroll. And so those are just two examples of how My Assistant may work. And what you're going to do on this demo is you may catch a couple different tasks that catch your eye. But keep in mind that there are over 300 pre-built tasks for the various modules within Sage. So once you implement My Assistant, your employees are going to start to question as to what's possible. So you'll think about what questions do I get on a monthly, daily, or weekly basis? Well, with My Assistant, we'll be able to notify people when things change or on a regular basis. So perhaps when you set up a new job, we want certain things to trigger. Or if we set up a new employee, we want certain actions to take place. As I mentioned before, we can not only send out direct deposit notifications to employees, but we can also send out payment statements to your different vendors as well. You are probably managing these tasks in one form or another, but perhaps you forgot that Grace needed her monthly budget report. Did you remember to send out that list of past due invoices? How would you ever know if the payroll tables were changed within Sage? Well, now with My Assistant, we're going to be automating the distribution of this information to ensure that nothing is missed. Project reports are going to be automatically generated and emailed out to your key stakeholders in the field so that they're up to date on their projects, allowing them to take action with data-driven decisions. Perhaps you want to notify your subcontractors of new safety guidelines with regards to COVID-19. Perhaps you have a new payment instructions for your active vendors, telling them that we're going to mail them their checks and not to come pick them up. We could also send employees a separate pay statement for FMLA pay, so we can start to really get creative with how we distribute the information, and it'll be readily available for those people there. And so with that introduction, we're going to go ahead and jump on into the software today. But before we do that, Tony, did we have any questions, or was there anything you'd like to add to what we've provided thus far?
No additions or questions, but I did want to mention for everybody that Joni did go ahead and post the link for the Office Connector webinar tomorrow in the chat box. So, and just as a reminder, chat box is your friend. If you got any questions, let me know as we go. If not, going great. Thanks, Marshall.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Tony. Let me know if those questions change at all. And so what we're going to look at first is the Sage 300 Construction and Real Estate Program. You'll notice here on the left-hand side that My Assistant is another module, just like Job Cost or Payroll, but it's going to have a lot of functionality that's not within the 300 CRE program inherently. When you click on the My Assistant icon here, you can either run one of those tasks that have been activated, or you can launch the actual My Assistant application. And I've already done it. I have it here on the bottom. So when you launch My Assistant, you then get the designer module. And this is where we can really get into the different tasks that I've been describing. We can turn them on and off, decide who gets to use them, and also determine email lists and whatnot. Now, you're currently looking at the different applications, and I mentioned that there are over 300 pre-built tasks that come with My Assistant. But you can also get creative with, if you know the Sage database, and you can start to create your own conditions. Notice under the accounts payable section, the number of reports that are just for that single module. You can go ahead and search for different items as well. So perhaps I wanted to come up here and look up vendor liability insurance. You could type in vendor and go ahead and search. What that's going to do is return anything that has to do with vendors there. And you can see a couple here that are bolded, and these bolded ones are actually already active. So these are ones that I've gone in here and turned them on. If I scroll down just a little bit, you'll see the one that I mentioned a moment ago, which is vendors with expiring workers' comp insurance. Let's go ahead and jump into this task to take a little peek under the hood here today. When we go ahead and open the task here, we can start to understand what MyAssistant is doing. And for most of the pre-built tasks that come with the system, we're going to provide an information page. This is a best practice, as this is going to provide a description as to what this is doing. Now you can also customize your conditions as well, setting them up in particular categories, but this particular condition is going to look through all those vendors and return those where the vendor insurance is required and it's past a specified number of days. Jumping to the next section down here on the left-hand side, it already pre-selected the condition for me. But you can, if you're creating your own tasks, you can use one of the 300 plus conditions that comes with the program. And many conditions allow you to have some customization. So for example, perhaps I want those AP vendors where their insurance is expiring within 30 days, or 15, or 60, whatever you best see fit. Next, we'll come down to the schedule. And all schedules can be run on demand, which means that you can go into any task and just run it whenever you'd like. So if I wanted to know how many vendors were within compliance, I could run that task right now. But we can get a little bit more creative with this schedule. We can run that on an intermittent basis, which means daily, weekly, monthly, or just at one time in the future. But I want to point out this particular option because this is particularly important in my opinion. We have the ability to run one of these tasks at the conclusion of a 300 CRE program. Now, what does that mean? That means that when something happens in Sage, what we're going to do is we're going to automatically trigger the task. For this particular scenario, we may want to run the task every time someone adjusts the AP settings. I mentioned earlier that you could be notified if someone changes something within payroll. And so this is a particularly important feature to MyAssistant, especially when we talk about automating workflow. And so next thing we'll do is come down to the data folders. Perhaps you only have one data folder, perhaps you have multiple. If you're running multiple data folders within Sage, you don't need to set up an extra task. You just check the box right here. Now, I mentioned earlier that when you think of the action, you really think about it as an email. And you can do a lot with this email. With Sage MyAssistant, we can automatically distribute a spreadsheet. So we could take, a spreadsheet template, put information into the spreadsheet, and distribute that to your project managers. Perhaps they like working with Microsoft Excel. If you have a Crystal report that you're using today that you really like, you can create that report in Crystal, and then you can use MyAssistant to distribute that report as well. Or you can select one of the many reports that are within Sage 300 CRE, and then the Word and PDF will be more so for static documents. And what I mean by that, apparently, say you have a generic form that you need to send to every vendor, you could send that as a PDF. Now, there's one other feature that I want to point out here on the email, and that's this box down here at the very bottom. This box down here, what it's going to do is pull in a list into the email. And it's going to pull in information from Sage. So in addition to being able to pull in an attachment, which is like a report, we can also pull in a list of information. Now, what would this list actually look like? I'll give you an example of an email that was sent to me that is providing me with all of the vendors that has workers' comp insurance expiring here shortly. So this grid of information, the vendor name, the contact, and the expiration date are all controlled right down here. So what I can do to kind of demonstrate that is I can put in my own email address today. And what I'm going to do is pull in an additional field down here to this particular list. So here on the right-hand side, these are actually database fields. They can not only be used in this list down here, but you'll notice in the body of the email, there's also some dynamic characters. So what that means is that you can come in here and you can say, hello, and then come over to the right-hand side, and we want the address book contact and the contact name. So what that's effectively going to do is it's going to pull the appropriate contact into your email based on the records that were selected back on that condition. And so you may want to add other information, but you can also take details here on the right-hand side, such as, job cost category or other details that relate to these vendors, and you can start to pull them into the reports. So perhaps you want to grab the address person and drag that down here. You can see how I now added that to the list. Perhaps you want dollar amounts or other dates or other information regarding the vendors, including some custom fields here. So what I'll do now is I'll go ahead and save this task. There is some additional information here. I'll cover that fairly quickly. This primarily has to do with how the reports and inquiries are arranged or filtered. And then you can also set up additional notification options. So you can be notified each time the task is run. To basically, it's an extra email that says, yes, this did run successfully. And so what I've done is gone ahead and saved that task. And what I'm going to do here is click run. That's the first thing we're going to do is just simply run the task. So what MyAssistant did is it said, hey, we found 31 vendors that met that condition. Now I'm working with some sample data. Hopefully you would only have a couple vendors that are out of compliance, but here you can see a list of all of those vendors. Now, what I did before is I just ran it. But what I can do now is I can click run and send. And so it ran the task once again, but what it's doing in the background right now is it's formulating that email, checking the email addresses there, and then distributing that information to the appropriate people. It should take just a few moments, and I'll show you the email as soon as it hits my inbox here on the other side. But I wanted to show a couple other examples today as well, because that's just one of the 300 plus tasks that does come right out of the box here. So what I'm going to do here is collapse my accounts payable, and we're going to look into the payroll section next. And the particular example that I want to show today has to do with employees' pay statements. Now, I want you to think about how you might currently be processing your pay statements. I've spoken with customers that they still go through an old process of printing out the pay statement. They put it in an envelope, they put a stamp on the envelope and then send that out, and that accomplishes the task. But you got to consider the cost of a stamp, the cost of an envelope, and whatnot. And with this particular task, we can click a couple buttons, and then all of the employees simply receive those items. Oops, that's my vendor one. They receive those items in their email automatically. And so bear with me here just one moment while I pull up the next example that I have here. Oh, I thought I already pulled it up, so bear with me here. Here it is. And so here's an example of the pay statement that will be sent to your employees. Notice how you can determine the email that these get sent from. This is being sent from sage.myassistant@gmail.com, but keep in mind this is a dummy email. You can have this say whatever you'd like, and they can't necessarily respond to it. If they wanted to respond to it, you could include something like this in the email. If you have any questions, please contact HR. Now, the direct deposit notifications here, they can be password protected. If I go ahead and open this up, it opened up the PDF on my other window. But here's an example of a direct deposit statement that comes right out of the box with MyAssistant. If you're using other reports out of payroll, you can add them to the email the way that I showed a moment ago. Now, I do want to dive a little bit deeper into this direct deposits task here. And so what we're going to do here is go ahead and open up this task as well. But instead of running down all the different options, I'm going to jump right back to the email section and notice that the attachment is included here in the attachment section. If you open up these report options, this is where you would set your parameters for a different report. We want to pull it in for the appropriate employee, and we want to pull that in for the appropriate period ending date. Notice right here is the option where we can use a password to protect these documents it's a rich PDF file, so you can protect those. And right here, you can see that we can use a value in Sage for doing password protection. I've got a really great article from the knowledge base that walks you through the steps on how to put the last 4 digits of an employee's social security number as the password for these MyAssistant things. So that's a pretty common ask, is that we have that password as the last 4 of the social, which is very, very possible. And so just wanted to highlight those report parameters for that particular task. Now, there are many other tasks that are included with MyAssistant. Some of the really popular reports are some of the project management and the job cost reports. Perhaps you want to be notified of RFIs that are not returned within 5 days. That's an example of a task that can be run to hold people accountable. Perhaps you require that you have daily reports on each of your jobs. Run a report to see those that are missing. If you have accidents that were reported yesterday, perhaps we want to notify the owner of the company whenever an accident happens. We could also come under the job cost section for cost codes that may be over budget. I can right-click this and run the task, and what this is going to return are all of those cost codes that are in fact over budget. And so we could have this trigger as soon as these cost codes are over budget so that your project managers are notified. Those are just a couple examples of how MyAssistant can be used from a job cost perspective as well. I have a couple other examples of emails that I'll show you here. We have one here that's an electronic payment notification that you may send to a vendor. If we go ahead and open up this report here, it opens up here and I'll drag it over. This is a payment notification. And so for these 5 or 6, looks like 7 different invoices, we list all the invoices that were payable if we held any retainage or discounts, and we show what we have paid that customer up until an effective date. So again, this report comes with the product. We can send this out to our vendors at the conclusion of a Sage program, perhaps print checks out of accounts payable, and then this automatically gets distributed. So you can start to think about the different ways that you might use the tool in terms of automation. A couple other examples that I have here that I wanted to highlight for you guys today. Another one is not cost codes over budget, but perhaps you have jobs with change orders that haven't been returned recently. And I've got some here, change orders waiting to be approved. I know that some construction companies are, they really make a lot of their profit on the change order process, and so it may be pertinent to respond to those change orders with an approval fairly quickly. And so we can run a task here within Sage to pull up all those change orders that have yet to be approved, and that may be a way that you can help to facilitate someone's workflow with regards to MyAssistant. Now, there is one more little teaser that I wanted to bring to the table when it comes to MyAssistant. We can do more than what I've shown today. And ideally, what I'm trying to say is that there's actually an additional component to MyAssistant that's called My Communicator. And so if you like the feature functionality that I've shown so far with how we can start to integrate with the Outlook, we can actually take it to another level. And the My Communicator will actually enhance MyAssistant in a few different ways. My Communicator will allow those lists that are within Outlook to be live, so we can take a static list and connect it directly to Sage. we can more easily task out those tasks for other people within our company to follow up on, and we get visibility to replies because we have access to the Exchange servers. And finally, you'll be able to do data entry directly from Microsoft Outlook. So if you receive those vendor compliance records back, you don't have to open up Sage. You can update the information directly from Outlook. And so those are just a couple teasers as to what's available with the My Communicator, which would definitely be the next step up from MyAssistant. I also want to discuss before we jump back into the PowerPoint slides today, I wanted to discuss the different license types that are available for MyAssistant. Notice how you can access MyAssistant right from 300 Construction and Real Estate. With the standard license of MyAssistant, you can come into the module here. You can open up those tasks that have been tasked to you, such as some vendor setup or invoice maintenance, and you can run these tasks from here. The benefit of that is you can run any task on demand, and you can then see the result right here within your Sage 300 CRE. With the designer license, you'll not only be able to access this designer window that we had introduced earlier, but you can also do everything I've shown today in terms of editing the existing tasks as well as creating your brand new tasks. And we even have particular tasks here that are kind of set up as a template to help you get started. And so we also have the full knowledge base that provides documentation. There's plenty of that for this product as well. And so that's just about everything that I had to show you guys here within the tool. And so before I jump back into the PowerPoint slides today, Tony, were there any other questions that came up in the meantime?
No, I haven't seen any additional questions come through, and I do appreciate you pointing out the My Communicator feature because that is definitely like what I usually tell people is phase two. Once you get in using My Assistant, you fall in love with it. Oh, it gets better. You'll add My Communicator, and there's some great tips and tricks you provided there with that.
Yeah, definitely. So if you're interested in the My Communicator, if you like what you've seen so far, we'd be happy to set something up for you and your company to take that deeper dive. And so jumping back into the slide deck, I wanted to share some more common uses for the My Assistant application. And so you'll start to think about your business need. If we go with that example on the bottom there, each Monday, I email Phil all of his job reports. I have to go into Sage and manually generate the reports, put them in an email, and then send them to Phil, each Monday. Well, with My Assistant, what we're going to do is we're going to set up this task once. And then what's going to happen is Phil's going to receive all of his job reports each Monday morning without you having to go trigger that option. And we can also password protect those if you're concerned about sensitive details. There are some other common uses for My Assistant. Perhaps you have instructions to subcontractors who are selected on jobs that are being shut down due to COVID. You could call and email each subcontractor individually. Alternatively, you could leverage the address book to send out a mass email through My Assistant. And so those are just a couple common uses for Sage My Assistant. And so to kind of recap what we looked at today, we did start by taking an overview of the My Assistant product. And then we jumped into the product and started talking about tasks right away and how you can set up a condition, a schedule, and an action to start automating those tasks that you do on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. I showed the My Assistant product in action. I showed how we can run those tasks on demand, as well as set up those emails, as well as several examples of the emails that did come through today. So I wanted to thank you all for your time here today. As I mentioned, we are going to open it up for questions here shortly. If you do have more questions or would like a more personalized demonstration, or if you just prefer email, feel free to contact myself or Tony with the information provided on the screen here today. And Tony, that's just about everything that I had to share. Was anything that you'd like to add? Anything I missed with regards to My Assistant that they should be aware of?
No, I don't think miss would be a strong word. My assistant is by far my favorite add-on module to Sage 300 CRE. You're welcome, Cheryl. I just saw your note in the chat box. It's my favorite module. I love the live tile, the standard feature on the menu, and my communicator. But if anybody should want a deeper dive or ask any questions, things may come to you, really do consider my assistant like an extra resource in your office. So if you could ask a person, hey, let me know when this happens, or hey, don't let me forget about this, or hey, so and so is very particular about having reports every Monday when they come in. Those are great uses for my assistant. So if you think of anything like that down the road or later on today, let Marshall or myself know. And I, again, thank you, Marshall, very much for your time today in the present. Awesome. Take care. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your time, guys.
Thanks, Marshall.